Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Sabbath services. Now, I know this information may get to you a little late, but it lasts forever, and very important for you to remember. Okay? Question: how do you know that between the two evenings is after sunset and not before sunset? Where in the Bible do you find how God used those two terms to make it in a chronological sense that we could absolutely know that between the two evenings can never be from noon to sunset? Because that's what people say. Okay? Where do we find that in the Bible? Anybody? Exodus 16. Exodus 16 becomes very important. Now we're going to cover a couple of things here as we go through. Exodus 16. Okay? Now, verse 12 is the key. And the way that I discovered this when this false doctrine was first preached in the Worldwide Church of God was because I just finished writing the Harmony of the Gospels. Okay? And in there, I put that if there's any other information concerning the chronology or the Passover, I'll be sure and let you know. Okay? Because you see, we were confronted with this proposition. We were told by a PhD Jewish scholar, Robert L. Kuhn, that between the two evenings is from about 1 in the afternoon until sunset. And that if you say it's after sunset, you're wrong. And what he was trying to prove was that the Passover was actually on the 15th and not on the 14th, and that's when number 2 in charge of WCG, Garner Ted Armstrong, began to call the Passover the Lord's Supper, that we're going to see today. You can't even call it the Lord's Supper. Okay? Now, so, Dolores, remember, I came home from the conference with this, and I had to say, now, if we cannot find any place in the Bible where God uses evening and between the evenings in a chronological way, then we would have to accept what he said, right? Wouldn't that be what you would have to do? And after all, a PhD, and I think he has 2 of them, you know. Okay. So verse 12, Exodus 16. I've heard the murmurings of the children of Israel, speak to them, saying, between the two evenings. Now that's the literal from the Hebrew. Now, you don't have that in the King James. And you can't find it in Strong's Concordance. Very important to understand. Too many people put too much reliance on Strong's Concordance. Now, Strong's Concordance can help you a great deal. But it doesn't give the derivations of the verb, it only gives the root verb. And the root verb is erev. So people look at that and say, well, I can't find between the two evenings. How did you get between the two evenings? Well, this is why last week I brought the Hebrew interlinear, and I'll cut out these portions and put it into my next letter, showing the difference between evening and Bein Ha'arbaim. Totally spelled differently. You don't even have to know Hebrew, because you can look at it and say and know they're two different words. Okay? Saying, between the two evenings you shall eat flesh. All right? What time of day was it that God was speaking to them? Well, this happened to be a Sabbath day. So probably in the morning they got up on the Sabbath day and they started railing against Moses and Aaron, saying, we want flesh to eat. You brought us out here in the wilderness to kill us. And Moses and Aaron fell on their faces, and God said, they're not murmuring against you, they're murmuring against me. So here's the answer God gave. Remember, sometimes God will answer even if you are angry. And if he does, he has a greater purpose beyond what your little anger may be. Now, if it's just totally lustful, like it was the second occurrence of quail, he sent it to them, and a lot of them died because they were so lustful, they were eating them raw. So they died. Okay? Here in this case, he said, I've heard the murmuring of the children of Israel speak to them, saying, between the two evenings you shall eat flesh. And in the morning, showing that this was the Sabbath afternoon, he was speaking to them, and that the next morning something else would happen. Okay? You shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. Okay? And the bread was manna. Okay, question. How do I know it's a Sabbath? Two ways. Number one, how many days did they receive the manna? Right here in this chapter, 6 days. Okay, didn't they? On the sixth day, gather twice as much, doesn't breed worms that stink, right? Okay. The next day, the Sabbath day, they went out to get some, and God said, how long refuse you to keep my commandments? Okay, that's one proof. Another proof is calendar. The Passover in the year of the Exodus was on a Wednesday, 14th. Okay? So you can do this going forward or backwards. You can take Wednesday in the middle of the week and go forward, and you come to the 15th day of the second month, and it's a Sabbath. Okay? You can go backwards. You can say, all right, it has to be a Sabbath, just like I said, because they got the manna 6 days, and you count backwards, and you come to Passover in the middle of the week. So that's how you do it. Okay? Because you're right, there's no calendar which says, and on this Sabbath day. Okay? That's correct. But you have to use the scriptures and the calculated Hebrew calendar to do it. See? Because the calculated Hebrew calendar is what God gave. No other calendar. Okay? And by the way, with the calculated Hebrew calendar, you can prove, if you go through the booklet that we produced on the calculated Hebrew calendar, that the year of the flood was a leap year, 385 days. Okay? So there are a lot of things you can do with the calendar, calculated Hebrew calendar. All right? Now, let's go forward from here. You shall eat flesh, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. And it came to pass at sunset. So God had to speak this before sunset, right? And sunset here in the Hebrew is Ba-Erev, which means sunset. Now, remember Leviticus 23:32? What does it say how you are to observe the Day of Atonement? From the 9th day of the month at sunset, from sunset to sunset, you are to observe your Sabbath. Okay? Why did he put that there? To make everyone sure that they keep the Day of Atonement the way that they should. Not start in the afternoon, not start if you see 3 stars at night, sunset. That's why in the Passover book, I've got a chart. Sun touching the horizon, Ba-Erev begins. Sun below the horizon, Ba-Erev is over, and between the 2 evenings begins. Okay? So let's read it here. Came to pass at sunset that quail came up all around the camp, and the children of Israel were out there at night stumbling around trying to find the quail. Doesn't say that, does it? Covered the camp. Now what does that mean? The quail came and landed on their tents. And God put them in a very passive position, so all they had to do is pick them up, wring their neck, skin them out, and have them ready to eat in about 5 minutes. That's about all the length of time it takes to do that for a quail. Okay? And we have done that. We did that when Skip Emerson was here. Many of you remember Skip Emerson? Yeah. He had goats, little lambs, and he did what? He sold quail commercially. He raised them. So he showed us how quickly it is. You just grab the quail, wring its neck, take a knife, slice it right down the middle, peel off the feathers, and the only edible that's really big enough to eat are the 2 breasts. And you put those on a little stick, hold them over the fire, and in about 10 minutes, maximum, you're eating it. Okay? So this is what happened. God was kind and merciful even in their anger. He dropped all the quail easy to catch. They didn't have to go around the camp, outside the camp to get it. Where did God put the manna? On the tents? No, outside the camp. Why? Because you got to work for your daily bread, right? So what was the work? You got to go out and get it if you want to eat. And if you don't want to eat, stay in your tent. Okay? I mean, God is practical. Now, what's important here? When were they to eat flesh? Between the 2 evenings. Question. Can you eat it before it comes? Of course not. You don't send someone to the store to get some food and they come home, you said, I've already ate it. I've already eaten it, rather. Sorry for the inappropriate English. Okay? So therefore, this proves, because the quail came at sunset, and God said you're going to eat between the 2 evenings. Sunset must come before, between the 2 evenings. So therefore, between the 2 evenings is when? After sunset. Okay? Now, this is the only example in the Bible that goes chronologically through the time frame this way. But it means what? If God said so, and it's written this way, and that's what happened, how many other places in the Bible do you need it to tell you that between the two evenings is after sunset and before dark? Zero. Okay? God is a God of truth. He will not lie. So therefore, if he says it once, is that not sufficient? Yes, indeed. All right. Now then, we covered this last time. When were the children of Israel to kill the Passover lamb? They were to get it on the 10th day of the month, and they were to kill it on the 14th between the two evenings, which means sunset on the 13th came. They were all watching the sunset. The sun went below the horizon. All the head of the household were there with their kid or their little lamb, and they all killed the lamb at the same time. Okay? Soon as the sun set, it had become between the two evenings. Okay? So it couldn't be in the afternoon. Okay? Now then, they were to eat it in the house. What was the instruction? How long they were to stay in the house? What was the instruction? You're not to go out of the door of your house until sunrise. Right? This paper said, well, they could leave as soon as the firstborn of the Egyptians were killed. Now, I still have the paper, 40 years old, okay, written by Kuhn and Graby. Still have it. I think every one of you have it, don't you? Okay, yeah. Because they had to leave by night. Now, what he was trying to do is justify a 15th Passover. And we'll look at that. But you can't leave at night if you're commanded to stay in your house till sunrise. Well, you try that sometime. Who created and made time? Who keeps the earth turning? Who has determined when sunrise and sunset and midnight and all of that is? God. Okay? Now, let's come here to Exodus 12. And we'll pick up where we left off last time. All of that was a review up to this point. Okay? Okay. All the children of Israel were in their houses scattered throughout the land of Goshen, correct? Yes. They had to gather at Ramses so they could be all organized in their marching order and then leave in an organized fashion. Okay? So, it took them from sunrise, walking over to Ramses. Some had to come as far as 15, 20 miles. That would take you most of the day, but you could walk it in a day. Okay. Some were close. Okay. Ramses is where they gathered. Okay. So it says here that they were spoiling the children of the Egyptians there. Okay. Verse 36, chapter 12. And the Lord gave people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and they granted their request, and they stripped the Egyptians of their gold, of their silver, of their jewelry, of their clothing, and so forth. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. Okay? Now, that's not really very far. They didn't travel very far the first night. Okay? So they had to come from their houses to Ramses. They weren't at Ramses in their tents as Josephus wrote about. See? Now, a little secret about Josephus. Josephus was to bring the history of the Jews, so he starts at creation, right? Okay? Who was Josephus? He was a priest of the first course, correct? Okay? He was alive during Jesus' ministry and the apostles, correct? Yes. His mission was to give the history of the Jews minus almost totally 99% of the ministry of Jesus and the apostles. So there would be a history written, and who would inspire that? God or Satan? God recorded it right here. Those inspirations to leave it out did not come from God. Later, a couple of other writers tried to insert some things in it, and most everyone knows that those are not true. Okay? So it goes like this. How many have Dr. Hayes' Compendium of World History? Okay, I do. In the foreword he wrote, the reason that the world history is all messed up, which it is because the victor always writes the history. And the history that is written bears down on facts, emphasizes other facts, overlooks other facts, and presents the story from the victor's perspective. Okay? Now, for example, if you wrote a biography about yourself, would you put in there all of your worst private sins? Or if you hired someone to write your biography for you, would you tell him what they are? All of us have things in our past that we would never tell anyone, correct? That true? That's true, isn't it? Yes. Now, I bring this up from this point of view. When you read about King David, a man after God's heart, he included his sins with Bathsheba and numbering the children of Israel. The other ones he didn't. Okay? Now then, the Jews, wanting to get rid of Christ as much as they could, would eliminate everything in their history about it. Now, why would that be? And why would that be inspired by Satan, the devil? Well, Satan knew there's going to be a whole lot more time. Because Satan knew he was going to raise up scholars who would look for the historical Jesus in history and never find him. Because they never recorded it. You know what organization did that? The Jesus Seminar. You ever heard of them? You haven't? You can read about them in the Harmony of the Gospels. Okay? They said the Bible can't be true, the New Testament can't be true, and the worst book of the New Testament is the Gospel of John. Not a word of it is true. Okay? And guess what? Many people believe it today. Good question. Philo of Alexandria, yeah, I got his book and read it. He was a famous Jewish priest from the renegade line of Onassis III that have their Jewish temple, an old pagan temple in Leontopolis. Okay? And Philo was the one who wanted the Jews to be able to be as good as or superior to the philosophers of the Greeks. So he did everything to allegorize the Bible and coordinate that with the pagan beliefs. Now, there are some facts he has that are true. There are some facts he has which are not true. And Philo is a very difficult book to read. Remember, I got that and I started reading. I said, what on earth is this? Okay. So yeah, Philo could have written about it. He could have written about the church. Okay. But out of Alexandria, Egypt, there's a reason why God sent Jesus there as an infant and brought him back out. There's nothing good in Egypt, period, religiously speaking. And to this day, they still have a lot of trouble. Were there any Roman chronicles about what happened to Jesus? No. And the Romans were against the Christians and sought to kill them at every chance that they could as well. I mean, you stop and think about it today. Stop and think about it. I mean, really objectively, what generation in the whole history of mankind has the blessing of all the Word of God, okay, has the blessing during Sabbath services where you can sit down and all open your own individual Bible or iPad or smartphone and have the Bible there and follow along with it, okay? What generation in the world has had all of these languages where we could check and prove the way we ought to? Now, yes, they had it in the first century and down through time from there, see. And then you read the history of the church. How many have ever read the writings of Chrysostom, written the 390s and early 400s AD? Did you know that there were so many Sabbath keepers in the area of what is called Turkey today that he railed against them for going to the synagogue? Now, that was a derisive remark because all the churches of God were in homes and because they were keeping what they called the Jewish Sabbath and the Jewish holy days. Does that sound familiar today? Yeah. In order to denigrate it, he called all those homes synagogues. See? I mean, I've given sermons on that years and years ago. Okay? I'll have to get it again and give some more. It's amazing what the church has gone through. Look at even the prophecy concerning the Smyrnans. You're going to go to jail and you're going to be killed. Thank you, Lord. That's a wonderful blessing. See? But he said, be faithful unto death, that I'll give you a crown of life. See? So think about what we have today. Think about it. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. You want to talk to someone who's a friend a long way away? Pick up a phone. Hello, I'm here. Oh, get on your iPad and let's see each other. Hi. Just think about what William Tyndale had to go through. We have some material on that. What he had to do. One man chased by the whole Roman Catholic Church. to kill him, because he dared translate the Bible into English. And by the way, he did get it all done. Because when you read that he did finish up through 2 Chronicles. Now, all Hebrew manuscripts have 2 Chronicles as the last book of the Old Testament. Okay? So, there's a great history to what God has done. See? And we can always count on that there are always those men and those women who will hold to the truth. See? Now, you will hear the sermon that I gave for the Sabbath after. Unleavened bread. See? Because you have the seventh day of unleavened bread on a Friday, then the Sabbath. And I gave a sermon and I read from the translation of the Waldensians in the 1100s, where they said we're close to the end. See? God has done such amazing things with so many people down through time, kept his promise the church would never die out, kept his promise his word would always be there. And today he's keeping his promise, like we have shown, with all of the technology of preaching the gospel to the whole world, even to those people who do not have a written language. In an organization called Hearing Comes by Faith. They have those who can read the English and translate it in the language of those who don't have a written language. So that no one, God is not going to leave a single human being on earth who can walk up to God and say, God, you never told me. Last generation, what are we going to have? 2 witnesses. Right? What does it say when they're dead? Everybody on the earth is going to see him lie in the street of Jerusalem 3.5 days, right? How are they going to do that? Well, today we can come pretty sure God's going to keep all of those satellites intact where they need to be to keep the phones working, right? Okay? How many have heard of SpaceX? SpaceX, the company. They're sending off satellites to put Wi-Fi so it will cover the whole Earth, all around the Earth, and from the North Pole to the South Pole. Now, what do you suppose that is for? Who do you suppose is making that happen? God is. Now, does he know that he's doing it for God? Probably not. Have people done things for God they don't know anything about? Yes. Okay? Every word of God is true. Everything is going to come to pass exactly as God has said. Okay? That's why every man, every woman needs to realize you're never going to tell God what to do. Can we, as sinful, carnal human beings, tell God what to do, who is perfect and created the heavens and the earth and all that's in them? I mean, think of the arrogance of that. Okay? Now, so here we go. Let's come down here to verse 40. Now, the sojourning of the children of Israel in Egypt was 430 years. Now, we've explained the difference between Genesis 15 and the 400 years and the 430. Okay? Remember what that is? 15 years after the sacrifice was given in Genesis 15, Isaac was born. That's 15. When Abraham took Isaac out to be offered, he's called a lad, so he had to be 15. So you have 400, 15 and 15, 430, and this was written after the fact. So the dating is correct. So if we can prove 415, and this is correct, 430, then it has to be true that Isaac was only 15, right? Because that's when he made the promises sure, correct? Okay, let's go there for just a minute. So today's not a regular organized sermon, but that's okay, you'll live through it. Okay. Where did I say go to? Okay. Genesis 22. Now this talks about when God spared Isaac and provided the lamb. The ram, rather. Now you know that as they were walking up there for the burnt sacrifice, that Abraham was looking around to see, well, are there any lambs? Are there, are there anything here to offer? No, he knew he was going to offer his son. Now think of that. Think of the parallel between that, God the Father, and Jesus Christ. Okay. So, let's pick it up here in verse 6. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, laid it upon Isaac, type of Christ carrying his own cross, right? Okay. Upon Isaac his son. And he took the fire pot. Now the King James says fire in his hand. You don't carry fire in your hand unless you're God. Okay. So it had to be a little fire pot of coals, right? Okay. In his hand, and a knife, and they both went together. Isaac spoke to his father and said, my father, and he said, here I am, my son, because Abraham didn't tell him, I'm going to take you down here and I'm going to sacrifice you. See? Can you imagine what a 15-year-old would do today? You ain't going to do that to me! Right? He didn't tell him. Well, Isaac was obedient. Okay? And he said, behold, he says, I see the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they both went on together. And they came to the place where God told him, and Abraham built an altar there. How were they to build altars? Whole stone, right? So it was a stony place, right? And laid the wood in order. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the wood upon the altar. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Now verse 11. And God the Father called, huh? No. And the angel of the Lord called to him. Angels carry messages, correct? Yes. From the heavens, and said, Abraham, Abraham, he said to here I am, and he said, do not lay your hand on the lad, nor do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God. So how long does our testing go on? From baptism to the end, correct? Yes, indeed. Seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Now remember, Isaac wasn't mentioned, but that was his son, but that was not the son of promise. Okay? Okay. Now notice verse 12. Do not lay your hand upon the lad. So he had to be less than 20, right? So we got 415 years already up to this point, so he had to be 15, correct? Okay. Now then, the next major point is, when God the Father wants to send a message, he doesn't speak himself. He sends an angel to speak the message. That's what he did at the baptism, that's what he did at the transfiguration, etc. Do not lay your hand upon the lad, nor do anything to him, for now I know you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked. It wasn't there before. How did it get there? Did God cause it to sneak up behind? Okay. Or did God create it instantly? Could God create a ram instantly? Stick it in the thicket? Boom! That's all he'd have to do, right? And then wouldn't that be a divine sacrifice? If God created it specially for the substitute? Think of that in relationship to Christ. Did not God divinely create Christ in the womb of the Virgin Mary to be the sacrifice for all the sins of the world? Yes, he did. Okay? Now notice, this was not a lamb. It wasn't a stray little lost lamb lost in the thicket. This was a ram, full grown. What was Christ? Full grown. Having the blood of a priest, blood of the kingship within him through his mother Mary. And the high priest did not perform his service until he was what? 30 years old, fully mature. Okay? So, this ram signified Christ as a substitutionary sacrifice. Okay? Was entangled in the thicket in its horns. Now, how's a ram going to do that? Have you ever seen on these wild shows rams butting their heads together, you know, fighting over who's going to have the flock of the females and so forth? Okay? Have you ever seen a ram with his horns stuck in the thicket? No. God put it there. Okay? And Abraham went and took the lamb, or the ram rather, didn't fight. Did Christ fight? Didn't say in the ram, blurt it out, you know, nothing like that. And offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide, so that it is said to this day, in the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham out of the heavens a second time and said, by myself. That's a message from God. See? Through an angel. See? So right here proves that what was written, that God the Father was the God of the Old Testament, is not true. An angel said this, okay? By myself have I sworn, said the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, that in blessing I will bless you, and in multiplying I will multiply your seed like the stars of heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and your seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Fantastic thing at that time. I mean, think about that. Okay? All the nations of the earth. What a prophecy. What does that cover? From that time clear through to when? The second resurrection, right? I mean, think about that for a prophecy for just a minute. you know? And think about the stupidity of men going in there trying to debunk the Bible. And it's like the blind trying to find the lead tape, you know, the lead type. See, you never know which word is word because all the letters are backwards. You ever seen the lead type? Okay, has to be laid out backwards because when it prints, if you don't put it in backwards, when you print it, it's going to come out backwards. So you put it in backwards, so you read backwards, right to left. Put it in. Okay. All the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. One man. And no one's going to enter into the kingdom of God unless it comes through Abraham, right? What does it say of us? If you're Christ, then you're Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. Okay, let's take a break.